Hello everybody, welcome to my video. Today I'll be talking to you guys how to get a 60% win rate on World of Tanks Blitz. It isn't the easiest of tasks, but it isn't impossible, so I'll be giving you guys 10 tips as to how to achieve this goal. Tip number 1 is to pick a direction and go with your team. So before the game actually starts, I would highly recommend you tell your team to go either left or right, because if your team all stays together, then you've got a higher chance of winning the game. I would either recommend, as I said, go left or right. You can't go down the middle. That would just be a bizarre move and you'll probably get all your team killed. So either choose left or right. There's a high chance that your team won't listen to you, but you've really got to put that out there, so there's more of a chance of your team going the same way you would like to go. The reason this tip is quite important is because if you all stick together, you've got a higher chance of staying alive, because the enemy won't just be targeting one person, they'll be targeting 7 of you at the same time, so you've got a higher survival rate if you were to all stick together. So that is a really important tip. Tip number 2 is communication. The reason why communication is really important is because your team needs to know what you're doing. So if you're going to drive to a particular base, such as base A, B or C, it is crucial that your team know that, so they can try and cover you, or perhaps try and cover you while you go to that particular base. Now, if you don't communicate with your team, they're not going to know what you're doing, therefore you're going to have a team who don't know what they're doing, and you're just going to end up getting yourself destroyed, because if you don't communicate, the other team probably are doing some degree of communication, and it's fundamental that you talk to each other so you can help each other out. Tip number 3 is to use an overpowered tank. Example of these would include the Black Prince, the Tiger P or the SU-152. Now, it seems fairly obvious why you would use an overpowered tank. It's purely because it'll be harder for your enemies to destroy you, and it'll be easier for you to destroy your enemies. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is to use a tank you're good at. So what this means is when you go onto your gaming profile, look at what tanks you do well in. To do this, you go on your profile, you go on vehicles, and then you filter out all the vehicles you've used and filter them out with the tanks you win most in, so the highest win rate you've got as a tank. Whichever tank that may be, use that tank with your highest win rate to play games, because the chances are, if you've got a high win rate in a particular tank, if you keep using that, you should be able to sustain that win rate and hopefully improve on that as you continue to use that tank in the future. So this is all down to personal preference. In terms of what tank to use, I can't recommend what tank you should be playing. I know I previously said use the Tiger P, Black Prince or obviously 152, but the problem is those tanks might not necessarily support your playstyle. Some people like to use fast tanks. I prefer to use tanks which are a little bit slower, which have a little bit more armor and a high rate of fire. So that's just my that's my preference. It doesn't mean that that should be your preference too. It's all down to your style of play. So check out on your profile what tanks you're good at and stick with that, and stick with whatever tanks have got a high win rate for yourself. Tip number 5. Now this is a very important tip. Do not grind a tank if you're trying to get a high win rate. Now this, I shouldn't have to explain to you why this is important, but I will do that anyway, because you might not have a clue what I'm talking about. So when I say don't grind, it means if you're trying to get a high win rate, don't start using new tanks you haven't used before, because to get your tank, what you're currently using, to the highest standard, you need to play with it a lot and to rank up your tank and everything like that. So if you begin to use, for example, a Carnarvon for the first time, you're not going to have a very nice time, because your tank is going to be shit. It's not going to be a very good vehicle because you'll be getting destroyed a lot, purely because it's a stock tank. You're going to have the lowest gun, you're going to have the lowest armor, and if you want to build a high win rate, you're not going to be able to do that if you're using a stock tank. So if you really want to get a high win rate, use a tank which is fully upgraded and fully maxed out, so you've got a better chance of, well, staying alive and destroying your enemies. So do not grind. It's a bad idea if you want to improve your win rate. Tip number 6 is to play low tier. A lot of you guys aren't going to like that tip because a lot of you probably don't play lower tiers, such as tier 1, 2, 3 and 4. But the truth is, if you really want to get yourself a high win rate, I would suggest you play in tier 2. This is purely because you'll be playing against enemies who aren't very good at the game. You'll be playing against players who have only played about, 20, 30 games. Whereas if you played about 5,000 matches, for example, you're probably going to do very well against other players who've only played 30 matches. And you're most likely going to find those players in tiers 1, 2 and 3. So a lot of people will call this seal clubbing or seal scrubbing. But yes, it's true. If you want to get yourself a high win rate, play in low tiers. And that should be able to really help you get up to your 60% win rate. If you don't want to do this tip, you haven't got to. It's obviously easy. Well, it won't be as easy, but it'll make your life a lot easier to get to 60% if you play in lower tiers, because you're more likely to carry people as well in your own team. So yeah, play tiers 1, 2 and 3, maybe 4. It's up to you, but yeah, I think I would recommend tier 2, because then you can play against tier 1s and you'll be absolutely reaping them if you were to play against people who never played the game before. So yeah, that's a very highly recommended tip by myself if you play in tier 2. So tip number 7 would be to use the minimap, which is located in the top left hand side of your screen, as I'm sure you're all aware. The reason why this tip is important is because it tells you where all your teammates are, where the bases are, and it can also tell you where some enemies are as well, depending on if they've been spotted or not. Now, the way to strategize with this minimap is to always look where your teammates are, because if there's about 5 of you on one side of the map and you can't see any enemies on your minimap, even though there's 5 of you in one particular place, that will probably indicate that the enemy team is most likely on the other side of the map. So it should give you a good understanding of where everyone is. Even if you can't see where the enemies are on the minimap, you could make an estimated, educated guess based on where your teammates are, because if your teammates aren't spotting the enemies, then there's a good chance that your enemies are most likely at the opposite side of the map. So I would highly recommend to use the minimap, although it isn't particularly vital to use it all the time. It does help out a lot if you know where your teammates are, because if you ever get yourself into a bit of trouble, you'll know where to run to. Tip number 8 is to stay alive. So to stay alive is how you go about doing that is up to you, but this all depends on what tank you're using. So I'll go through the tanks. If you're a tank destroyer and you want to stay alive, you should probably sit at the back of the map in a good position so you can snipe the enemies while your team are on the front line destroying your enemies. So if you're a tank destroyer, you shouldn't be rushing because you'll probably get yourself destroyed straight away, because most tank destroyers have got poor armor. Now, if you're a light tank, you should probably be on the front line spotting the enemies and perhaps flanking them as well. But make sure you do this in a way where you don't get bombarded by enemy bullets. So always make sure you got cover around you if you're going to be spotting for your team, because if you're out in the open, you're an easy target for anyone to destroy. Now for a medium tank, most of them, like this one here, the Type 59, it's really important that you hold down or in a hold down position, because your turret is quite strong, and also you've got a decent amount of speed going for you as well. So to stay alive in a medium tank, I would recommend you just go hold down, period. While be on the front line, of course. So if you're a heavy tank, I would recommend you are simply on the front line, side scraping, taking the shots in, because heavy tanks have high amounts of armour, such as this one here, the Black Prince, which is very well armoured, has got a high amount of HP. So while you're on the front line, taking in the shots, your team will be also supporting you in destroying the enemies you're trying to destroy yourself. So if you do all these things, you'll probably stay alive. And also, the longer you stay alive, the more you can influence the game, because once you're dead, there's only so much you can do. Because if you do die, you can still communicate with your team, but you can't physically do anything to help your team out. So the longer you stay alive, the higher chance there is of you to influence the game, and to influence it in a way to go in your team's favour. So I think your primary target in a game should probably be to stay alive for as long as possible, but that doesn't mean camping in the corner of the map. Put yourself out there, but don't get yourself killed in the first minute, like some people do. Tip number 9 is to play supremacy matches. Now, a lot of people right now will probably be scratching their head as to why I'm suggesting this tip. This is purely because if you play in counter, you've got a higher chance of drawing a game. So if you want to improve your win rate, drawing a game isn't going to help you. It's just as bad as losing a game. So if you play supremacy matches, you're probably not going to ever draw a match. I've played about 8,000 matches so far on this game, and I've never, to my knowledge, drew a supremacy match. And if you play supremacy matches, you're automatically rolling out drawing matches. So therefore you can either win or you can lose, but you simply can't draw. The only time you would ever draw in supremacy would be if neither team gets 1,000 points overall, or if you somehow both manage to get 1,000 points in the same at the same time. So if you want to never draw again, you play supremacy. However, that would mean that you've got a higher responsibility of communicating with your team, and also going the same way. You can't be selfish in supremacy. You've really got to work as a team to secure as many bases as you can while destroying the enemies. Okay, so tip number 10 is to platoon. So the way you should be platooning, now I must say myself, I've got a 60% win rate, but I've never actually platooned before, but I can see the benefits of doing so. So if you want to platoon, I would recommend you get a friend, both use overpowered tanks and play low tiers. To do this, I would recommend you both play, or if you've got access to it, the Kenny Otsu on tier 2. If you platoon with 2 Kenny Otsus, you've got a very good chance of winning every single game. I kid you not. Or if you haven't, just play in the Black Prince and the Tiger P, platoon between the two, and yes, you've got a higher chance of winning. But just make sure that both of you have got a good win rate if you're going to platoon. Hope this helps.